Hello, everyone. This is Eric, and today we're going to do an interview with an English teacher working in South Korea. Let's welcome Maya. Hi, Maya.
Hi.
Could you quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Maya. I'm from Alberta, Canada, and I am currently a native English teacher in two public elementary schools here in South Korea.
Wow. And where are you in South Korea?
So I'm in Gyeonggi province. That is the province surrounding Seoul. So I'm just outside of the city.
Okay. And when did you start?
So I started teaching in March 2021. So I arrived in Korea in February. I haven't been here that long.
Okay, well, that's exciting. So many new experiences. But with COVID happening, how was it coming to Korea? Did you have to quarantine? How was that process of coming to Korea?
So I did have to quarantine. At the time that I arrived in South Korea, I wasn't vaccinated. They didn't have any exemptions for people, even if I was. So I did have to quarantine for 2 weeks. I came to Korea through EPIC, the English program in Korea. And so EPIC hires a lot of new teachers every February to start for the start of the March semester. So they had us all arrive at roughly the same time within a couple of days, and we all quarantined at the same facility.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. You get a couple of different schools in Korea. You get the public schools, the EPIC program that you're part of, and then, but the majority of English teachers come for and they work at an English academy at a Hagwon. So it's very competitive getting into EPIC. What do you think made your resume or your stand out? What did you have on your resume that was important that you think put you apart from someone else that might be applying for EPIC?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I know a lot of people are very curious about EPICs, kind of the logic behind who they hire and who they're looking for. And of course, I don't work for EPIC, so I can't say anything apart from maybe what I've seen from my own experiences, the questions I was asked in my interview, and the types of information they ask for on the application. But I think they're looking some things that I had on my application that I think are probably beneficial either for public schools or for teaching in Hagwons. I've been to South Korea before. I studied here for about 4.5 months as an exchange student while I was in university. So I was already familiar with certain aspects of Korean food, Korean culture. I had a basic knowledge of the Korean language. So I think that is certainly a strength. I think another thing was that I had past experience working with children and past experience tutoring English. I'd been a volunteer English tutor to foreign students at my university in Canada when I was a student. So I think having some experience tutoring English, having lots of experience, years of experience working with elementary, mainly elementary age children, but all school age children, was also a big benefit. I think it shows to them that I am comfortable working with kids, that I'm familiar with maybe some challenges that language learners might face. And I know what I'm getting myself into, at least a bit, in terms of what I can expect for Korean culture, Korean food. So I think those are all really strong.
Very true. I think, when you want to get a job abroad, they want to know that they can hire someone that can do the job, and trust is important. So if you have a resume, you have to say perhaps or if you have an interview even, you have to bring up some knowledge that you have of Korea. Obviously, you're fortunate. You've been in Korea before. Someone who hasn't been in Korea could perhaps do some research on Korea to know what they're getting into. And then experience. The majority of people coming to Korea to teach, or people looking to teach English abroad, they might not have experience yet. So just add whatever experience you've had, especially with kids, teaching, tutoring. That's awesome. So it does sound like, with this experience that you've had before and the way that you presented it to whoever picked you, I think you did a good job. What did you study, by the way?
So my major was neuroscience. So the closest thing I have to any sort of education background in my post-secondary education would be a few developmental psychology classes. So not a very direct tie to education. Of course, there are lots of things that can generally be applied across transferable skills. And before this, after I finished university, I was actually working for a tour company, which again, not particularly related to education, but you'll, at least in my experience, there are some striking similarities between leading a group of 80 British tourists around Spain and keeping a class of 30 first graders from descending into chaos. So I think, yeah, even having a background outside of education, if you can show that you have transferable skills, that can certainly be an asset.
Very good. Yeah. So whatever you've done, just show that you can do it, because obviously they want someone that can do it, and you just have to show that you're the best candidate for the job. And then this is a question you probably get asked a lot. Why did you decide to come and teach English in South Korea?
So that's a great question. For me, I'd known about the EPIC program ever since the time I came here as an exchange student. And actually, before I came as a teacher, I have friends from university who came here before me to teach English through EPIC or to teach in hagwons. And so I was familiar that was an opportunity that exists for a lot of people if they have a degree, if they have the qualifications to come here and teach. And so it was something I'd always thought I would love to do if I had the chance. I loved my time in South Korea as a student, but after I finished university and started a job in the tourism and hospitality management industry, I loved my job and I thought I really want to continue my career in this field. So I didn't ever really see myself having the opportunity to come back. However, with coronavirus and the entire tourism industry around the world being put on hold for the most part, it was a great opportunity for me to actually do something that I'd always wanted to do since I kind of had found out about it, but thought it might never fit into my career trajectory. So it was kind of a dream come true in some ways that I actually was able to come back to South Korea and kind of go on this adventure.
Well, that's really nice. Yeah, I think the majority of people come to Korea. It's basically a transition where you can come over, you can get some experience, you can save a little bit of money. But most people stay here perhaps a year or 2 years. How long do you plan on staying here? Or what, do you have any solid idea, or is it up in the air?
It's very up in the air. I think, like I said before the pandemic happened, I didn't think that I would ever have an opportunity. I didn't think I would have the opportunity again to live in South Korea. And so if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that you never know what the future holds. And so I think it's very open at the moment what I'll do, but just taking it 1 year at a time, I guess.
Okay. Well, okay. So you were here for 4 months as an exchange student, and you've been here for a couple of months now. I know it's very early, and because of Corona, you can't really travel or do much. But what are some of the highlights so far? What are some experiences that you really enjoyed? You know, the type of experiences you tell your parents about back home.
Oh, that's a great question. I think for me, I love Korean food. So that is one thing. I live in I come from a rather rural, remote area in Canada. So there are no Korean restaurants or Korean supermarkets, or even really a lot of Asian supermarkets or I guess places where I can kind of satisfy that craving for Korean food back home. So the food is a huge part of what I love about living here. I love Korean food. And also I think, of course, with the pandemic, it's kind of on hold at the moment, but I really enjoy swing dancing and social dancing. And there's a great swing dance scene here in South Korea, as well as salsa dance and bachata. And so, you know, that's one thing for me that I really enjoy back home that I've also really enjoyed here. And, you know, of course, I'm looking forward to when I'll be able to do that again. And I think also, I found it to be such an enriching experience, getting to make new friends and meet people. And certainly it is a lot harder to kind of get out and get into some social gatherings and start meeting people during the current restrictions, but that is something, those moments, those times that I have had to meet new people and start to make new friends has just been really so exciting. So I've been really, enjoying those moments.
Yeah, I've been meaning to learn how to dance properly for the past couple of years, and then last year I was supposed to start, and well, obviously we can't do that. But I think with anyone coming to Korea, or whatever activity or hobby you want to practice or do, there should be some kind of, especially in Seoul, in the north, and in the major cities, you'll find a community. So it's important to find something like that. You don't want to be isolated and just stay at home all the time. You should find something where you can interact with people. Otherwise, you might get quite lonely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where are you staying? What is the housing situation when you come to Korea? How does that work?
So for most employers, Arbus will provide a single residency, so usually a studio apartment or like a one-room apartment that usually comes fully furnished to teachers, and that's part of the standard EPIC contract, but also fairly standard. A lot of hagwons as well. If they're hiring someone from out of the country, they will generally either provide a fully furnished studio apartment or provide an extra kind of stipend on top of the base salary to cover the cost of an apartment. So for myself, I'm living in just a little one-room studio. So it's quite small. There's not a lot of space, but I didn't bring a lot with me from Canada, so it works for me just fine.
Is it, well, talking about bringing things from Canada, is there something that you would suggest people bring from home, that, or something that you, or what are some things that you brought with you that you think other people should consider too?
So, I mean, there are so many, before I came, I read so many blogs and watched so many YouTube videos of what you need to bring, what you can't find. And so I think partly it depends where you live as to what sort of things will be easier to find or hard to find here. Of course, in Seoul, it's a lot easier to get things or certain specialty items or specialty foods that maybe you are familiar with back home that may be quite different than Korean food. But for me, what are some things that I brought from home? So I think I brought a few of my favorite things, some of my favorite hair products, my favorite toothpaste. I'm quite flexible. This is not my first time living abroad, so I'm generally the kind of person who just buys whatever's on sale. So mostly I figured whatever I need, I can buy in Korea. But there are a few things that I do have favorites. Like I said, my favorite toothpaste, I definitely brought a year's supply of that. A few like favorite brands, I really didn't bring much anything. So for me, I found that pretty much everything I want, I can find in Korea. Some things are more expensive than back home. For example, some hair products. If you do have certain hair products that you prefer, especially products for curly hair, I find that they're more expensive here, and I can only buy them online. There's no stores in my town or area that really sell those types of things, but they are available.
Okay. So I just had another question that I wanted to ask. So with your family, for example, you said that you were a traveler, you've traveled a lot, but I know that a lot of English teachers, perhaps, they get homesick. How do you deal with that, perhaps? Or how do you stop from getting homesick?
Yeah, homesickness is definitely a real thing. And it's really important to be really aware of your mental health when you're abroad, especially during the pandemic. We've had for a lot of people 1.5 years where even if they've been living in the same country or the same area as their family, they haven't been able to get together as much as they would have hoped or as much as they normally would. And so it's been a difficult year. And I think being abroad makes that more difficult. It's just that much more difficult for me, at least. That's one of my major concerns coming here during the pandemic, was that if something were to happen with my family back home, it would be harder to get home in a hurry because, of course, there's quarantines and all of these things. So that was something that I really had to wrestle with when I was deciding whether or not I would come. And for me, the homesickness, I have lived abroad before, and I've dealt with homesickness before. It's certainly not easy. But at the same time, for me and my family, we have every Saturday morning, so that's a Friday evening back home, we've got a family Zoom call and just catch up on all the news. So really making a point to really keep connected with family back home really helps, just not only for helping battle that homesickness, but also just as kind of a self-care to help make sure that I'm, really taking care of myself mentally and emotionally while I'm abroad, because it is a difficult time to be away from family, to be sure.
Yeah, I think, and there is isolation because with COVID, you can't meet other people as easily too, or go out at certain times until 10 when there's curfew. So it is difficult to meet people too. So if you have a connection back home, you've got this routine where you can meet them and talk about I think that's really healthy. Let's talk a bit about your school. How is teaching in South Korea?
So, I mean, everyone has a different experience, and I can't speak for Hagwons, but for public schools, that's where most of my friends and acquaintances are situated currently. Everyone's experience is so different. One thing you'll hear a lot if you do come to teach with EPIC is you'll hear, it depends. What will your apartment be like? What will your schools be like? What will your responsibilities in the classroom be like? All of these things depend so much on your area, on your particular school.
How's your relationship with your co-teachers and the teaching?
So my relationship with my co-teachers, I teach at two very small rural schools. So I have several co-teachers, and I would say generally we have a good relationship. Most of my co-teachers don't speak English fluently. Some of my co-teachers don't really speak much English at all. Now, I'm conversational in Korean, so for simple conversations, we can just have it in Korean. Otherwise, we just use a translation app. Papago is my personal favorite. But generally speaking, for my English classes, I lead the class, I plan everything myself, and the co-teacher is just there to maybe help enforce class discipline or help some students who might be struggling a little bit more. But generally speaking, with my co-teachers, I have the main responsibility in the classroom, and that's a balance that's worked well for us so far.
And then you're happy to take the lead. Can you take us through a normal lesson with you? How do you structure your lesson? What do you do in class? What will we see if we see Maya in class taking control?
Yes. So generally, I will have planned the lesson. Well, I'll always have planned the lesson in advance based on whatever my co-teacher and I have decided on we're going to teach that day. Usually a lesson based out of the textbook. We tend to follow, at least at my school, we tend to follow through the textbook fairly consistently. So generally, I will have planned out some games, made some PowerPoints, or prepared any materials in advance, and I'll bring that to class with me. One of my schools doesn't have an English classroom, so I just visit each homeroom individually when I teach English class. And so we'll get there, we'll say hi to everyone, see how everyone is doing, and then we'll usually start our lesson with some review, just reviewing what we've done last class, just seeing, making sure that the kids are getting their brains warmed up, remembering what we did last time. And then generally, and this is kind of what's recommended by EPIC, and this is the pattern I follow for my lessons as well, which would be your classic PPP lesson, present, practice, produce. So we present the material for the lesson to get the students familiar with it, to get them thinking. Then we practice. We do some activities, maybe together as a class or something where I'm guiding them through step by step so that they can start to practice things and get familiar with it and get a bit more comfortable with it. And then the end of the lesson, usually we will have a game or an activity, something where they can use the language independently and really be producing on their own what we've practiced and what was presented at the start of class. And so that's, I think, a very standard kind of lesson structure here in South Korea. And that's generally what I follow for most of my lessons as well.
So you can use conversational Korean. Do you use any Korean in class while you're teaching?
Generally, I try to only use English in class as much as possible. Occasionally, I will translate something if there's maybe something that my co-teacher doesn't know to translate, or if my co-teacher's had to step out or is helping a student, and there's another student who's struggling. But generally, I try to keep it to absolute minimum because, of course, these students, I'm here to be speaking in English. And one strategy that I use to enable the students to be able to speak as much English in the classroom as possible is at the start of every lesson when we do our hellos and how are yous is we have a review of classroom English, things like, raise your hand or maybe common questions or common classroom words so that the students
to me.
Yeah, so that the students we've are constantly practicing the language the students need to talk to me and that I need to talk to them in the classroom. So that's something that I find really helpful, both for me and for the students.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. It's important to teach them some classroom instructions and commands that they can use. And also your job is to teach them English. What about some Korean that people can use in general if they come into Korea if they're coming to Korea for the first time? What are some words or expressions that you think would be useful for someone like that?
So I think learning Korean is a difficult language, definitely, but before you come, definitely learn the Korean alphabet. It's very straightforward. There are probably hundreds of videos on YouTube showing you the alphabet. And so I would definitely recommend learning that before you come. It's very straightforward. It's the kind of thing that you can learn in a day, maybe a couple days. So if you put your mind to it. So I would definitely recommend that. I would also really recommend at least learning a few polite phrases. Hello, goodbye, please, thank you. These things will go a long way. In terms of actual, maybe more conversational Korean or everyday Korean, again, there are so many fantastic YouTube channels or websites online that have fantastic resources that are completely free for Korean learners. And I guess one strategy that I've used in my day-to-day life here is if it's lunchtime and I've heard a word or I've seen a word that I don't know and it's 5 times already and we haven't even made it to 12 o'clock, I'm going to make a note of that or ask what it is or, jot it down or take a picture on my phone so that I can look it up later because, the words that come up again and again, those are going to be the words that are most useful. So, before you come, learning the basics will go a long way. But once you get here, really focusing on the things that you hear the most will definitely help you a lot.
Okay. Well, let me ask you about, meeting Koreans. How do you meet Koreans and how do you interact with them? Are there some cultural tips that you could give someone when meeting Koreans or when going out or working with coworkers?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the last question, working with coworkers. I think one thing to be aware of is that in Korea, hierarchy is really important. And coming from Canada, where it's not so important, at least not where I grew up, here it's very important, the age hierarchy and as well as the rank hierarchy within the school. So definitely making sure that you are properly greeting and being polite to your principal, your vice principal, your head teacher. These things will really help to really ensure that there is a more harmonious work environment because we do not want to create these misunderstandings with our school, with the people we work with. So I think really being aware of these hierarchies and just, showing people the respect that they expect to receive as someone in their position is something that for someone like me coming from Canada is not something not something that maybe comes to me so naturally because, in Canadian culture, I can talk to my university professors and call them by their first name and they're fine with that. Or, even in high school, some of us would call our high school teachers by their first name, whereas in Korea, students would never call their teacher by their first name. You'd always have to use their title and speak respectfully. So for me, that's one thing that I've tried really hard to try and keep. But to answer an earlier question about how do I meet Koreans and interacting with Koreans, during coronavirus, it's a bit difficult. So most of the Koreans that I've met since I've started teaching have either been other teachers that I've met online or that I've met from orientation with EPIC, or coworkers. So obviously I'm working with Koreans. I'm the only foreigner at my school, actually at both of my schools. I'm the only foreign teacher. So that gives me an opportunity to get to know my Korean co-teachers, as well as language exchange apps are also a fantastic way to just chat and practice Korean, as well as make some acquaintances, make some friends who are Korean.
So that sounds really nice. I like I think, reputation is important, hierarchy, and the way that you show respect, not only to your co-teachers and your principal, but also to the students. I think we should always make sure that after an interaction, how will that person feel? Will they feel better after talking with you? Will they feel like they were respected? Rather err on the side of caution, rather than speaking too bluntly about things or raising your opinion. I think it's very interesting. Koreans are more sensitive to these things than we are. A simple example that I'll give is, I remember I went to eat dinner with my coworkers and we were having a great time, and I would just say, "Oh, this is so great. I wish there was. I wish I had more of this one dish," and then they would order a whole nother dish just for that. So they really listen to what you say. So be careful with how you say things. So you teach at 2 different schools. How is transportation in Korea? How do you move around?
So transportation is one of my favorite things about Korea, and my Korean friends will laugh at me for saying this, but it's true. I come from a very rural area back home, and there is no public transportation. If I want to get to the nearest bus terminal, it's about an hour and a half drive away. So here in Korea, where the entire country is so connected, and you can use one card, your T-Money card or your Cash-B card, on any bus or subway, anywhere in the country, that to me is amazing. I love it. And so even here, I'm living in a relatively rural area. Both of my schools are surrounded by farms. It's very beautiful. And even for me, I am able to take the bus to school. So there aren't, it may be in Seoul or in larger cities, you can expect buses to run often every 10 minutes. Here in the countryside, it's more like once an hour, but still, very affordable and very accessible.
So what about vacations? How many days vacation do you get if you work at EPIC?
So for EPIC teachers, generally speaking, you are granted 26 days of paid vacation. Now, I know in the past this was different. You started out with fewer days, and then the longer you worked, you would gain additional days of vacation. But a few years ago, they've changed it. Now everyone gets the same. So that's 26 days, roughly 5 weeks. And so, of course, it depends on each school's schedule as to how long their breaks are. But generally speaking, I think most teachers would take about 2 weeks in the summer and about 3 weeks in the winter.
I see.
The school vacation periods are longer than 2 weeks in the summer and 3 weeks in the winter. But during the time that you don't have paid vacation, oftentimes you will be teaching English camp, which is essentially summer school or winter school, or just be at the school. You're expected to be preparing your lessons for the upcoming semester.
Yeah, we call that desk warming, right? So you're just going to sit at your desk working on lesson plans, preparing or doing whatever you want to. It could be a lonely time, or you can use that time. But that's specifically for EPIC, not when you're working at an academy. You're going to be working those hours. You don't have that many vacation days. Can I ask you about the pay? What can a new teacher expect to be paid when they come to Korea?
So the pay does vary between EPIC or public schools and hagwons. So hagwons, it really varies on the school and on your experience from what I've heard. However, with EPIC, it's a more standard pay scale. You can actually find it on the EPIC website. And the starting pay does vary from province to province. But generally, the starting pay is somewhere in the ballpark of 2 million won or 2.2 million won per month. And potentially with additional bonuses if you are teaching at more than one school, or if you're in a particularly remote rural area, there may be an additional, 100,000 won or 200,000 won that you could receive on top of that kind of base salary.
Excellent. Well, do you have any final words, any last tips for new teachers coming to South Korea that you would like to share?
I think the best advice that I can give would be just really be open to new experiences, especially if you're coming with EPIC. You don't know which school necessarily. You might not know which schools you're placed at before you arrive. And so you don't necessarily know what to expect, which can be really scary. So my advice, at least for anyone particularly coming with EPIC, is really to just be open. Things might not be the way you expect, and that may be hard to adjust. I know for me, I thought I knew what to expect when I first came, but definitely there were still things, there was still a very steep learning curve, but having an open mind, being willing to adapt and really kind of take a look at things and see, I guess, how can I fit myself to this situation? How can I, make the best of the things that are difficult? How can I really take full advantage of the things that are amazing? Coming with this willingness to be really flexible and open and really make the best of it. That's the best advice I can give to really have the best time that you can here in South Korea.
Wow, what a brilliant attitude to have, coming to a new country, opening up yourself, being flexible and adapting. I think when you teach abroad, that's all that could be expected from you. I think if someone's too rigid in what they want to do and in the way that they live, it might be difficult for them to come here. But if you're open and you want to learn new things and enjoy your life and learn from other people, then this is definitely for you. Well, Maya, thank you so much for joining me, for sharing all this knowledge. I'm sure you've helped a lot of teachers with your experience.
Oh, I really hope so. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time.
All right. See you.